The helicopter blades were still whirling when the rocket screamed through the darkness. The blast painted the compound walls in brilliant orange and white, raining debris across the landing area and transforming a simple medical rescue into a nightmare. Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison dropped to the ground fast. His Navy SEAL team spread out in perfect formation, weapons raised, eyes searching for enemies already dangerously close. "Get the medic to our wounded man," Morrison yelled through the noise. "We have about 5 minutes before they swarm us." That's when Lieutenant Ariana Brooks climbed out of the Black Hawk. Mid-30s, normal height, dressed in regular combat gear with a bright medical cross on her shoulder. She hauled a massive medical bag that looked like it weighed almost as much as she did, and her rifle dangled awkwardly like she didn't know quite how to carry it. In the dim red light, she appeared exactly like her paperwork claimed, a Navy nurse assigned to the unit for this mission, someone who'd spent far more time in hospitals than battlefields. "Doc, we need you inside right now," Sergeant Mills shouted, pointing toward the compound where their injured teammate waited with 3 other soldiers. Ariana nodded and followed Mills through the gate, moving carefully like someone afraid of tripping over her equipment. Behind them, the rest of the SEAL team set up defensive positions as bullets started hammering the walls. The enemy, whoever they were, had been ready for this moment. Inside the compound, things looked even worse than the radio calls suggested. Staff Sergeant Kyle Richmond sprawled on a blood-soaked stretcher, his left leg destroyed by a roadside bomb. 2 other SEALs, both freshly wounded, had pulled him into this crumbling building and radioed for help. The 4th man, Petty Officer Davis, stood at the window firing careful 3-round bursts back at the enemy. Finally, Richmond groaned through clenched teeth when Ariana dropped beside him. "No offense, Doc, but I'm losing a lot of blood here." "No offense taken," Ariana answered softly. Her hands worked with smooth efficiency, slicing away his pant leg, examining the injury with quick professional focus. "You're not dying yet. You have a solid hour before that becomes serious. But let's not push it." Outside, the battle was getting worse. Morrison's voice crackled through the radio. "Enemy contact from multiple directions, north and east. They're trying to surround us." Ariana worked on Richmond's leg with unwavering hands, wrapping pressure bandages and connecting an IV line while explosions shook dust from the ceiling. She appeared totally absorbed in her patient, unaware of the chaos building around them. Mills observed her with mixed feelings of respect and worry. He'd watched combat medics work under fire plenty of times, but something about her composure seemed almost strange. "Doc, have you been in a gunfight this intense before?" Mills asked, loading a round as movement flashed through a crack in the wall. "A time or two," she said without glancing up from Richmond's leg. "Pass me the morphine from the red pouch." Mills handed it over, but his focus kept splitting between the medic and the worsening tactical picture. Outside, through the window, Davis was burning through ammunition fast. The enemy gunfire outside was multiplying, closing in on their position from 3 directions. Morrison's voice returned, tension clear. "We're getting hammered out here. Whatever you're doing inside, finish it fast." 2 minutes, Ariana called back, her voice still impossibly steady. She gave Richmond morphine, checked his IV, and started wrapping his leg with tight bandages that would hold until real surgeons could work on him. Her movements were clean and exact, precisely what you'd expect from a Navy nurse with serious experience. Then the compound's eastern wall blew apart. The explosion threw Mills backward, ears screaming, vision blurred. Through the smoke and dust, he saw figures rushing through the opening. Dark shapes carrying rifles, moving with aggressive confidence like fighters who believed they had their prey cornered. Davis tried to shoot back but caught a round to his chest plate that knocked him flat. Gasped. Mills grabbed for his weapon, understanding with cold certainty that they were about to be overwhelmed. Too many enemies, too near, and half his team was hurt. He lifted his rifle, prepared to fight until the end. Then Ariana Brooks rose to her feet. What came next would be studied, questioned, and eventually hidden by intelligence officials who couldn't quite accept the reports. But for Mills, watching from the floor with dust still hanging in the air, It looked like watching someone become a completely different person. The clumsy, gear-heavy medic who'd awkwardly left the helicopter vanished. In her place stood someone who moved with the smooth deadliness of a professional warrior. She reached into her medical bag and pulled out a weapon that absolutely hadn't been visible earlier. A compact HK-46 with a custom silencer, the type of rifle that elite units chose for reliability and punch. The weapon rose in one fluid motion, no longer hanging awkwardly but suddenly appearing like part of her body. She fired twice and the first enemy through the opening collapsed before he could aim. She shifted to the second target instantly, her movements so quick they looked rehearsed. 2 more shots. 2 more enemies fall. The third fighter managed to spray automatic fire that missed badly, bullets slamming the wall behind her. Ariana didn't even flinch. She simply adjusted her aim slightly and placed 2 rounds center mass. "What the?" Davis began, but she was already advanced. She moved toward the breach like flowing water, the HK-46 tracking smoothly from one target to the next. An enemy appeared in the gap. AK-47 already pointed her. She shot him 3 times before he could squeeze the trigger, then spun and engaged someone Mills hadn't spotted yet, a fighter trying to flank through a window on the left. The firefight should have killed her. She was walking through a death trap, exposing herself to fire from every angle, doing everything the training manual warned against. But somehow, impossibly, their bullets kept missing while hers found targets with perfect accuracy. "Mills, get Richmond ready to move," she commanded, her voice still calm but now carrying an authority that made him jump to obey without thinking. "Davis, covering fire on my signal." She dropped to one knee and swapped magazines with inhuman speed. Her empty magazine hit the ground as the full one was already locked in place. Through the breach, Mills could see more enemies gathering, at least 12 fighters preparing to charge their position. "Now," Ariana shouted. Davis, despite his confusion and bruised ribs, opened up on full automatic, spraying rounds through the opening. Under his covering fire, Ariana pulled something from her vest, a fragmentation grenade that Mills was positive hadn't been there before. She held it for 2 seconds, then threw it through the breach with the accuracy of a professional pitcher. The explosion brought screams. Before the smoke cleared, Ariana was moving again, this time toward the window where Davis had been shooting. She glided to the opening, HK-46, ready, and immediately engaged 3 targets one after another. Each shot was measured, controlled, final. No wild spraying, no panic shooting. Every bullet had a job, and every job got done. "Unbelievable," Davis breathed, watching a woman who was supposed to be a nurse systematically eliminate enemies from their defensive line. "Who is she really?" Outside, Morrison's voice crackled with confusion and fresh optimism. "What's going on in there? Enemies are pulling back. Retreat." Ariana pressed her radio with one hand while operating her rifle with the other, dropping a fighter who'd been crawling toward them. "This is Brooks. Compound secured. Getting ready to move wounded to the landing zone." "Brooks. What? How did you—" "No time, Chief. We have an open. Let's take it." She turned to Mills and Davis, and for a moment they saw her eyes clearly in the weak light. They were the same eyes that had examined Richmond's wound with medical detachment. But now they held something else, a cold evaluation that made both SEALs unconsciously stand straight. "Richmond moves first," she said, slinging the HK-46 with practiced ease. "Mills, you lead. Davis, watch our back. I'll carry the patient." "Doc, he weighs 220. Mills objected. "Let me." Ariana bent down and lifted Richmond in a fireman's carry with effort, but no real struggle. The wounded SEAL, floating on morphine, managed a weak laugh. "Guess she hits the gym," he mumbled. They moved through the compound with Ariana directing their path through quiet commands that somehow carried absolute weight. The firefight outside had shifted, with Morrison's team pressing forward against an enemy that suddenly seemed disorganized and uncertain. Through breaks in the walls, Mills glimpsed bodies more than seemed possible from such a brief fight. They reached the landing zone just as the Black Hawk pilot was about to abandon them. Morrison's team laid down covering fire as they loaded Richmond, Then everyone scrambled aboard, weapons still pointing outward, expecting the enemy to make one last push. But no push came. The hostile forces had withdrawn, broken, scattered by the sudden turn of events. As the helicopter climbed away, Mills found himself staring at Ariana, who had returned to being the quiet nurse, checking Richmond's vital signs and adjusting his IV, with the same calm skill she'd shown before everything exploded. "Doc," Mills started, then couldn't find the words. She glanced at him, a faint smile touching her mouth. "Yes, Sergeant. I mean, how did you do my job?" She finished for him. "That's all I did. Kept the patient breathing and got everyone home safe." Morrison, listening from across the cargo bay, couldn't keep quiet. "Lieutenant Brooks, I think we need a serious conversation when we reach base." "If you want, Chief," she replied mildly, returning her focus to Richmond's leg wound. But Morrison noticed what Mills had seen. The HK-46, now properly slung, had custom features that weren't standard military issue. Her gear, arranged with perfect efficiency, showed wear patterns that went way beyond 1 or 2 deployments, and most revealing, her hands weren't shaking. No adrenaline crash, no sign she'd just survived one of the most brutal close-quarters battles of the entire mission. The flight back to base filled with puzzled silence from the SEAL team, broken only by the helicopter's blades and Richmond's occasional moans. Every soldier was processing what they'd witnessed, trying to match the stumbling nurse who'd arrived with the lethal fighter who'd saved their lives. Davis leaned toward Mills and whispered, "Did that actually happen? Did a Navy nurse just eliminate like 20 guys in 2 minutes?" "More than 20, Mills replied quietly, his eyes locked on Ariana. "I counted at least 30 bodies in and around that compound, and she only used 2 magazines." At the base medical building, Ariana helped transfer Richmond to the surgical team, giving a detailed briefing that proved her medical knowledge was completely real. She spoke in exact clinical language, answered the surgeon's questions confidently, and seemed every bit the skilled Navy nurse her records claimed she was. But Morrison caught her in the corridor before she could disappear into the officers' area. "Lieutenant Brooks," he said, keeping his voice down. "Can we talk?" She turned, her face neutral. "Of course, Chief." He led her to a quiet spot away from the busy medical area. For a long moment, he just looked at her, trying to see past the mask, to whatever truth hid underneath. "I've been a SEAL for 15 years, Morrison finally said. "I've worked alongside every special operations unit in the American military and some that officially don't exist. What I saw tonight, that wasn't a nurse defending herself. That was a trained operator doing work." Ariana met his stare without blinking. "I'm not certain what you mean, Chief." "The way you moved, the way you shot, the way you gave orders like someone used to being in charge." He stopped. "Who are you really?" "I'm exactly who my paperwork says I am," she replied calmly. "A Navy nurse with combat trauma training attached to your unit for this rotation. Your records also claim you've never worked in special operations." "That's accurate. So where did you learn to shoot like that? And where did that HK-46 come from?" A slight smile. "Quantico. I qualified expert marksman. It's in my file. As for the weapon, equipment records can be. Expert marksman doesn't explain combat reloads under fire. It doesn't explain tactical movement. It definitely doesn't explain Chief Morrison." She interrupted gently. "Sometimes people have abilities from earlier careers, earlier lives, and sometimes those abilities prove useful in unexpected moments." She paused. "Richmond's going to recover completely, by the way. Clean separation, minimal extra damage. He'll be running again in 6 months." Morrison recognized deflection when he heard it, but he also knew when he'd hit a brick wall. "Fine. Keep your secrets. But I need to know one thing. Can I count on you if things go sideways again?" "You could always count on me, Chief. That's why I'm here." He watched her walk away, still trying to understand it all. Later that night, he reviewed her service record, reading every line 3 times. Navy nurse commissioned 5 years earlier. Medical degree from Johns Hopkins. Specialty in combat trauma. No service gaps. No classified assignments. No hint of anything unusual. But buried in her civilian education background was a detail he almost overlooked. Bachelor's degree in international relations from Georgetown. Graduated 12 years prior. There was a 2-year blank between that degree and her medical school start. 2 years simply marked as private sector work. Morrison had worked in the intelligence world long enough to recognize a cover story. Nobody jumped from international relations to nursing school without a powerful reason, and nobody learned to shoot like Ariana Brooks from basic pistol qualification. He made a call to an old contact at JSOC headquarters. "I need a favor. Run a name for me. Lieutenant Ariana Brooks, Navy nurse currently with SEAL Team 7. What am I searching for? Anything that might be, well, interesting." 3 days later, his contact called back. "Morrison, where'd you get that name?" "She's assigned to my unit." "Why? I can't share much, but I'll tell you this. If she's working under that identity, it means someone very powerful wants her there for a purpose. Don't ask questions you won't like the answers to. Is she a threat?" A long silence. "Only to people who threaten her patients." "Drop it, Chief." But Morrison couldn't drop it, especially after the second incident. 2 weeks later, the SEAL team was assigned to secure a rural compound believed to house a high-value target. Intelligence predicted light resistance. Maybe a few guards. Nothing the team couldn't handle easily. Ariana wasn't meant to be on the mission at all. But when one of their corpsmen got severe food poisoning at the last second, she offered to fill the spot. "Just stay with the security team," Morrison told her during the pre-mission briefing. "We don't anticipate casualties, but if something happens, we'll bring them to you." "Understood," she replied with that same mild tone that somehow made him nervous. The mission went wrong immediately. The light resistance turned out to be nearly 50 heavily armed fighters, dug into strong defensive positions. The SEALs found themselves in sustained combat within minutes of arriving, taking fire from every direction. Morrison's team was trapped near the main compound structure when he heard Ariana's voice through the radio, calm and professional. "Chief, I'm heading to your location." "Negative. Stay with." "Already moving. Arriving in 2 minutes." He wanted to order her back, but his attention was consumed by the immediate danger of being surrounded by an enemy machine gun crew. His men were running low on ammunition, and their air support was still 15 minutes away. They needed a miracle. What they got was Ariana Brooks. She materialized through the smoke and chaos like a phantom, the HK-4116 in her grip looking natural there. She moved with the same lethal elegance Morrison had witnessed at the compound, but this time he got to observe her work from beginning to end. She flowed through the battlefield with almost supernatural awareness of where threats would emerge before they appeared. A fighter rose from behind cover, RPG on his shoulder. Ariana shot him before Morrison could even shout a warning. Another enemy tried flanking from the right. She dropped him with 2 quick shots while continuing forward. It was like watching someone play a video game on the easiest setting, except the bullets were genuine and every target was a human being who would have killed SEALs given the chance. She reached Morrison's position and instantly evaluated the tactical picture with a glance. "Machine gun nest, 12 o'clock, 2nd floor. That's pinning you down. I know, but we can't get an angle." "I can." Before he could respond, she was moving again. What followed was 12 minutes of the most accurate, deadly marksmanship Morrison had ever seen. Ariana worked through the compound with systematic efficiency, engaging targets with 2 or 3 shot bursts that never failed. She didn't gamble, didn't show off, just moved from spot to spot, eliminating threats with surgical precision. The machine gun nest went silent when she put rounds through 2 fighters in quick succession. A group attempting to organize a counterattack scattered when she dropped their leader, and 2 others in under 5 seconds. Every time the enemy thought they'd located her position, she was already somewhere else, attacking from an unexpected direction. Mills, watching from cover, kept a mental tally of her shots versus confirmed casualties. By the time the shooting ended, he'd counted 47 enemy dead. 47 in 12 minutes of close-quarters combat against an entrenched enemy. When the dust settled and the SEALs locked down the compound, they found evidence of her path everywhere. Bodies clustered in defensive spots, each taken down with surgical precision. Spent shell casings that told a story of constant movement and aggressive tactic. And in the center of it all, Ariana calmly treating a wounded SEAL with the same detached skill she'd displayed from the start. Morrison found her in the compound's courtyard bandaging a minor wound on Petty Officer Jackson's arm. "You'll be fine," she told Jackson. "Bullet passed straight through. Keep it clean and it'll heal without problems." "Thanks, Doc," Jackson replied, still looking at her with something between amazement and terror. Morrison waited until she'd finished with the patient, then pulled her aside. He didn't speak at first, just stared at her with mixed confusion and frustration. "You can't keep doing this," he finally said. "Doing what, Chief? Pretending to be something you're not." Ariana's face didn't change. "I'm exactly what I appear to be. A Navy nurse who knows how to protect herself and her patients. 50 confirmed casualties in 12 minutes. Isn't self-protection." "I counted 47, she corrected mildly. "And they were all actively attempting to kill American service members. That makes it protection in my view." Morrison ran his hand through his hair, struggling to keep his composure. "Who are you really?" "CIA, some special activities division. Delta." "I told you, Chief, I'm a nurse. Nurses don't move like that. They don't shoot like that. They don't." He stopped, choosing his words carefully. "I've worked with the finest operators in the world. What I just watched you do places you in that category. But if you're really just a nurse, then I'm the Pope." Ariana was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider something carefully. When she spoke again, her voice carried a different quality, still calm, but with an edge of something harder beneath. "Chief Morrison, has it crossed your mind that maybe someone decided your team needed extra insurance for this deployment? That maybe someone very high in the command structure thought it would be valuable to have someone with certain specialized abilities embedded with your unit? So you admit it." "I admit nothing. But hypothetically, if such a person existed, they'd probably appreciate not being forced into situations where they had to reveal capabilities meant to stay hidden. They'd prefer doing their actual job, keeping people alive rather than shooting their way through enemy position." Morrison absorbed this. "So tonight was me doing whatever was required to keep my teammates from dying, same as you would have done in my position. But you're not supposed to be in my position. You're supposed to be medical support. And I provided medical support. Jackson's arm is bandaged. The others are stable. Richmond made it to surgery because I kept him breathing long enough for extraction." She met his eyes directly. "Everything else is just details." Before Morrison could respond, one of his petty officers shouted, "Chief, you need to see this." They discovered what the intelligence reports had overlooked. Not just a weapons stockpile, but evidence of a major attack being planned against American forces. Documents, maps, communications gear. The compound had been a command hub, and its destruction would save American lives. "Looks like solid intelligence paid off," Morrison said, examining the captured materials. Ariana stood nearby, her face neutral. "Lucky break." But Morrison noticed how she wasn't surprised by any of the discoveries, how she seemed to know precisely what they'd find and where. And he understood with sudden clarity that this mission hadn't been about capturing a high-value target at all. It had been about destroying a command structure, and someone had ensured they had the right asset in place to accomplish it. "You knew," he said quietly, meeting her eyes. "You knew what was really here." "I knew what intelligence reported," she replied evenly. "Same as you." "That's not what I mean." She held his stare for a long moment, then smiled slightly. "Chief, I think you're reading too much into this. Sometimes a lucky break is just a lucky break. Now if you'll excuse me, I have patients to check on." She walked away, leaving Morrison standing among the evidence of a flawlessly executed operation that officially had nothing to do with the Navy nurse who'd just saved his entire team for the second time in 2 weeks. The rest of the deployment passed without major incident, at least by deployed standards. The SEAL team completed their assigned missions, rotated home on schedule, and submitted reports that mentioned Lieutenant Brooks's exceptional bravery, under fire while carefully avoiding specifics that might raise uncomfortable questions. But Morrison couldn't let it go. On their final night before flying back to the States, he found Ariana on the base perimeter watching the sunset over distant mountains. "You're not going to tell me, are you?" he said without introduction. She glanced at him, unsurprised by his arrival. "Tell you what? The truth. Who you really are, where you came from, why someone with your abilities is pretending to be a nurse with a SEAL team." Ariana was quiet for a long moment, her gaze returning to the mountains. "Chief, do you know how many people are working right now to keep Americans safe? Not just soldiers but intelligence officers, analysts, support staff, People in dozens of agencies with overlapping responsibilities and competing priorities. Sometimes those people need to work in the open. Sometimes they need to stay hidden. Which are you? I'm someone who wanted to do something meaningful. After spending years in places where meaningful involved things I'd rather forget. I went to medical school. I became a nurse. I joined the Navy to serve my country in a way that didn't involve. She trailed off, choosing her words carefully. Let's just say, in a way that didn't involve some of my previous abilities. But you still have those abilities. Obviously, you can't unlearn training like that. It becomes part of who you are, but that doesn't mean I want to use it. She turned to face him full. What happened on this deployment twice now? Those were exceptions, situations where people were going to die if someone didn't act. I'm not proud of it. I'm not ashamed either. I did what was necessary to keep my teammates alive. Morrison nodded slowly, finally grasping it. So what happens now? You go back to being a regular Navy nurse? That's the plan. Another year on my commitment. Then I'm thinking about Doctors Without Borders. Take my abilities somewhere they can do good without the shooting. They're going to want to medal you for this deployment. Then they'll have to do it quietly. I don't want attention, Chief. I just want to do my job and go home. Fair enough. Morrison extended his hand. For what it's worth, I'm glad you were there both times. My men are alive because of you. She shook his hand, her grip firm and professional. That's all I wanted. Take care of them, Chief. They're good men. What about you? Who takes care of you? She smiled genuinely this time. I've been taking care of myself for a long time. I'm fairly good at it. They flew home the next. Ariana returned to her assigned medical unit, filed her deployment paperwork, and resumed her regular duties with the same quiet skill she'd shown before. The men who'd served with her told stories in bars about the nurse who'd saved SEAL Team 7, though the details got vaguer with each telling. Memories clouded by security requirements, and the simple impossibility of believing what they'd witnessed. Morrison kept his promise. He didn't ask questions, didn't try to investigate further, but he kept the brass casing from one of Ariana's spent rounds, a reminder that sometimes the most valuable assets were the ones nobody knew existed. 3 years later, Morrison heard through unofficial channels that Lieutenant Brooks had completed her service commitment and left the Navy as planned. Last anyone heard, she was working with a medical relief organization in South America, running a clinic in a region troubled by cartel violence. He hoped she'd found the peace she was searching for, but somehow he doubted peace would find her. People like Ariana Brooks, whoever she really was, whatever shadows she'd emerged from, they had a way of being exactly where they were needed when they were needed, whether they wanted to be or not. Morrison's final memory of her was at the departure terminal. She wore civilian clothes, jeans, a simple shirt, a backpack over one shoulder. She looked like any other traveler heading home after deployment. Nothing remarkable, nothing dangerous. But as she walked past a group of loud contractors who were being aggressive and rude with the gate staff, Morrison saw it happen. One of them, drunk and belligerent, grabbed a young female sailor's arm. Before security could react, Ariana was there. She didn't raise her voice, didn't make a scene. She simply touched the contractor's wrist in a specific way that made him immediately release his grip and step back, eyes wide with sudden recognition that he'd made a serious error. The sailor hurried away. Ariana continued toward her gate without breaking stride. The contractor rubbed his wrist and decided to sit down and stay quiet. Morrison approached her before she could board. You can't help yourself, can you? She turned, a tired smile on her face. Old habit. Those abilities you mentioned wanting to forget. Do you really think you can leave them behind? Ariana considered the question carefully. No, but I can choose when to use them. I can choose to heal instead of hurt. That's the best I can do. And if trouble finds you again, in South America or wherever you end up, then I'll handle it the same way I always have. Quickly, quietly, and with minimal collateral damage. She paused, her expression softening. But I'm going to try really hard not to let it come to that. I'm tired, Chief. Tired of being the person who solves problems with bullets. I get that. I really do. Morrison suddenly remembered something important. Wait. Your rifle. The HK-46. What happened to it? Ariana paused, glancing back with that mysterious smile. What rifle? Go to my equipment manifest. I only carried standard issue medical gear and a sidearm. But you saw a Navy nurse doing her job under difficult circumstances. That's what goes in the official record. She adjusted her backpack. Equipment has a way of appearing when needed, and disappearing when it's not. Logistics can be complicated in deployment zones. Morrison understood. The weapon had never officially existed. which meant it had been provided through channels that didn't leave paper trails. Channels that would have retrieved it before she rotated home. Whoever had placed her with his team had planned everything. Of course, he said. My mistake. It happened. Memory gets fuzzy after intense operations. The mind plays tricks. She turned to leave, then stopped once more. Chief, if anyone ever asks about what happened out there, the compound, the firefight, remember that luck and adrenaline can make ordinary people do extraordinary things. That's a much simpler story than the alternatives. Understood. She nodded. Good luck, Lieutenant, or whatever your real rank is. She shook his hand firmly one last time. Just Ariana now, and thank you for not digging deeper. Some stones are better left unturned. Take care of yourself out there. Always do. Morrison watched her board the plane, carrying secrets he'd never fully understand. The world was full of shadows, and sometimes the people who lived in them were the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. He'd met one of those people, fought beside her, and lived because of her abilities. That was enough. Some mysteries were meant to stay unsolved. He headed to his own gate, already composing the sanitized version of events that would go into his official report. The truth would live only in the memories of the men who'd been there. A story they'd tell in quiet moments, to people who'd understand why some details had to stay buried. The HK-46, like the woman who'd wielded it, had returned to whatever shadows they'd emerged from, and that's exactly how it was supposed to be. The wolf doesn't announce itself to the sheep, but sometimes when wolves are circling, you need someone who speaks their language, and sometimes that someone looks like the least dangerous person in the room, right up until the moment they prove exactly how wrong that assumption is.